Okay, hey everyone, welcome to Lead Up Teach Google Hangout on air with myself, Elizabeth Bostwick, and my co-host, Laura Gilchrist. I'm a fourth grade teacher in the Finger Lakes region of New York, and I'm passionate about leadership, PBL, makerspace, and EdTech to enhance learning. Tonight, on episode 9 of Lead Up Teach, we're excited to welcome Dr. Chris Weber and Weston Kieschnick. Chris is a senior fellow at ICLE on RTI, Behavior and Mathematics, as well as the co-host for Diverge Ed on Twitter. And Weston is also a senior fellow for ICLE, an award-winning teacher of teachers, speaker, author, and has an excellent podcast titled Teaching Keating. Before we get started, Laura, please take a minute to introduce yourself.
Well, hello, Lead Up Teach. My name is Laura Gilchrist. I'm a teaching and learning coach in Kansas City. I taught science and social studies to middle schoolers for 20 years. And this is my second year as a coach at Turner High School. I'm passionate about teacher and collaborative leadership, PBL, and professional learning done right, including ed camps. And I'm so excited for our 9th episode of Lead Up Teach tonight. We are pumped to welcome you both. Chris and Weston, please go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Go ahead, Weston.
Good evening, everybody, or good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world or when you're watching this. My name is Weston Kieschnick. I am a senior fellow with the International Center for Leadership and Education. I don't want to spend too much time going through my bio, just by virtue of the fact that I want to get into the questions and the conversation. There's basically one thing you need to know about me, and it's that I love teaching. I love teaching so much, like it's a problem. I love teaching so much, I married a teacher, which means my kids are undoubtedly going to grow up to be resentful, probably. Not teachers, but probably resentful by virtue of the fact that there are so many conversations that happen around education in my house. I was a high school history teacher for 12 years and lucked into the blended space just by virtue of being the beneficiary of some really great circumstances and some really profound leadership who kind of saw farther into the future than even I did at the time. So that was my fall up the stairs into blended learning, but it has been a heck of a journey, and I've enjoyed it every minute.
Cool, Weston. I'm Chris Weber. I have been a teacher and a principal and assistant soup and an area soup, and along the way, what I'm most passionate about is every single student learns, whatever it takes. What kind of put me on my path, and I've gotten to write a couple books on this topic now, is I was a school principal of a program improvement school where, wow, everything had maybe been tried at this school, and lots of money had been spent and hadn't had much of an impact at this school, and we went in and did some simple things. By golly, 1 year of doing those simple things at this school where 80% of the students were free and reduced lunch, Latino and English learners, 1 year of doing simple things, which we would come to know as RTI, student performance had doubled. 3 years in, we were a national blue ribbon school, and after 4 years, student learning, student achievement, as measured by those old NCLB tests back in the day, student learning had quadrupled. So what's the point of that is you just will never accept anything less when you have that experience. You know kids can do everything and anything, that communities can do anything and everything, and what we determined is it didn't have to be super complicated. It didn't have to have high expectation. You need to care, love, and nurture and believe every single kid. And you needed to meet them where they were and give them what they needed. So that's what I'm passionate about.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Chris and Weston. We also want to give a special welcome to our Lead Up Teach audience here on Google and on Twitter. We're hosting a Twitter chat concurrently with tonight's Lead Up Teach Google Hangout, and we invite everyone to use the hashtag LeadUpTeach to connect and participate with the chat both during and after the Google Hangout.
Tonight on this exciting 9th episode of Lead Up Teach, we are going to hear about Chris and Weston's mission to inspire teachers to understand the power behind pairing RTI and blended learning.
So to get us started, just share a little bit about the journey that led you to be the inspiring educator you are today.
I'll go first this time, Weston. I forgot to mention that I'm also passionate about Weston.
Thank you, Chris.
More of that later, though, and about RTI and blended learning. But you know, I think two things led me to be a teacher. I'm a second career educator. Education is my second career, I think, as it is for many of us. And I was a pilot in the Air Force, odd first career, and so I didn't want to be a pilot in the Air Force anymore, and I didn't want to be a pilot in the airlines. And so I was looking for a career, to be completely honest with you. But I loved school so much. I still do. I love schools. I loved my teachers. I loved learning. I loved children. And strangely enough, I had the opportunity to volunteer, because we have that time and there's that expectation when you're an officer in the military. And so that's where I volunteered, were in schools and with children. And so to me it was a natural fit. I was serving in the military, and I still feel like, actually I feel like I'm still serving, but in an even more important way in working within schools. So it's pretty simple for me. Once you get into education, I'm sure Weston feels the same way. If education doesn't feel like a job to you, it's because you're nuts, and in a good way. You just love being with kids. You love being dorky and kooky and doing cartwheels in class and doing whatever it takes to get them kind of hooked. And so the bug bit me immediately, and then it was, nothing could kind of hold me back, even when it should have probably.
So as I answer your question, Liz, I'll say also ditto to Chris, that I'm also passionate about Chris, which we'll get into more later. But before we get into the bromance, for me, I'm a firm believer that almost nobody gets into education unless one of two things is true, right? So either you're an educator because you were the beneficiary of some really, really profound educational experience that was the result of a great teacher, right? And I talk to so many people I've talked to on my podcast and just in conversations that I have in schools for whom that is their truth. They were fortunate enough to have this great teacher who just, made teaching and just education ring that tuning fork just deep down in their soul, and they were just drawn to it. Or I've talked to some other folks for whom they became a teacher because they never had that experience. And I think my experience is interesting because both are simultaneously true. I feel like as an elementary and middle school student, I have really fond memories of my education and my academic experience, and that kind of pushed me and led me down a path towards education. But at the same time, I could not, and still to this day, I have a difficult time thinking about, a really impactful and profound high school teacher that I had, which I think led me to the path of becoming a high school teacher, because for so many kids, you just watch the trajectory of their school experience, and you watch the love for school die and the passion for learning. And I wanted to try to seek out a way where I could at least try to combat that to some extent. And the path was not always that virtuous. I will admit fully that I fought education for a long time. I fought teaching. I wanted so badly for my path to be something cooler. I think Chris's path is incredible. Like, he was an Air Force pilot, and I wanted so badly for my experience to be something that I thought was cooler or better. But I couldn't get away from it. Teaching was my calling. Like I said earlier, it rings that tuning fork in my soul, and getting in and working with kids and seeing them move along a continuum from point A to point B and beyond relative to proficiency, and just getting things, the innate feeling of happiness and joy that I get from that is inescapable. And that's what led me here, and it's what keeps me here, and it's what will keep me here until I can't do this anymore.
So don't you think that in the lead up now environment and that PLN, the folks, the amazing colleagues, some of whom I've now met in person, who are involved in that, they want to change the world.
Yes.
And I want to change the world. And I think it's not a stretch. In fact, it may be the truth of truths that education globally, man, that might be one of the biggest levers to change the world.
Yeah. And it's authentic. There's nothing disingenuous about that notion. Like I feel it. I feel it deep down. And And it's, I think that's the excitement that pushes all of us forward. We're at the beginning of the school year right now, so the excitement levels are high. But, come May, I think that's the feeling and the emotion that pushes us, from the beginning to the end of every single school year.
Yeah, man, I am fired up. And on that note, speaking of that tuning fork, you are both passionate about pairing RTI and blended learning. Why is it powerful for teachers to combine instruction and intervention systems in blended learning?
Chris, you want to jump on this?
Sure, I'll start anyway. Weston and I knew each other for quite a while before this combination, if you will, occurred to us. I'm just gonna mention two, Weston. One was that I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in education is initiative fatigue, or also known as death by initiative. And so here's another way of thinking of that is, as educators, we are inhibited by the sheer quantity of good ideas that are forced upon us, let's say. So, by the way, I think students and teachers also face the curse of quantity when it comes to standards and learning outcomes. Our curriculum is a mile wide, inch deep kind of thing. But certainly as it relates to initiatives, gosh, sometimes there's just too many. Well, here's another take on that sometimes that new initiative isn't or need not be completely disconnected from other really positive initiatives. Shoot, RTI can't survive and succeed without PLCs and CFAs and UBD, professional learning communities, common formative assessments, and understanding by design. I mean, they're really linked together, and we do a disservice to our colleagues and to ourselves when we don't make those explicit connections. So one thing that Weston and I saw was, hold on now, blended learning principles and practices can really enrich and enhance RTI, and RTI is this incredible framework within which blended learning can thrive and can probably find some anchors and some roots. But the other one, I think, Weston, sorry, I'll take this, steal this maybe from you, that kind of was the aha, was we read this ISTE white paper. It's not even published by an ISTE staff member, although we've talked to ISTE about this, or I should say Weston has. He maybe can provide some insights. But it was a guest author on ISTE's site. And his description of blended learning was that it was the perfect combination of differentiated instruction, individualized instruction, and personalized instruction. So this author, instead of pitting those three terms against one another, one's better than the other, this author, no. Well, what we read in differentiated, individualized, and personalized instruction were Tier 1, 2, and 3, and we're like, wait a minute, blended learning and RTI, they're talking about the same things, and so it was a real inspiration to make much more explicit that pairing.
Yeah, and in it, so in so much as Chris stole a comment from me, I'm gonna steal a comment from him, and yes, the bromance is strong with these two. I'm gonna steal a comment from him, because as Chris and I started to kind of flesh out, blended learning and RTI, and specifically this article from ISTE, and started to see not just the overlap, but the super intentional, as we saw it, cohesion between differentiated, individualized, and personalized, and tiers 1, 2, and 3. We started to talk about the why and the how these two things are so connected. And Chris said something that was really profound, and I didn't forget it. And he talked about RTI being what kids need, and blended learning being what teachers should want, right? And I'll flesh that out a little bit. So our RTI is what kids need, in the sense that if you look at John Hattie's work and you look at the effect size of RTI, it is 1.07. That is a massive effect size. You're talking more than 2 years of academic growth over a single year's worth of time when RTI is implemented with fidelity within the right constructs, right? That's massive. So to Chris's point, like, RTI is what all kids need. It's what all schools need and are required to have. And at the same time, blended is what teachers should want, in that Blended allows teachers the opportunity to increase their level of efficiency. It allows teachers to extend the reach of their instruction from beyond the walls and the time constraints of the classroom, right? And so while blended may not be listed, necessarily in John Hattie's work as having this effect size, what blended learning does is it increases our capacity to provide in-the-moment feedback to kids, which has an effect size of 0.75. Blended learning increases our capacity to provide direct instructions via alternate mediums other than just our own words. Blended learning increases our capacity to engage kids in the practice of metacognition, which has an effect size of 0.69. Like, it's one of those things where when you look at RTI and when you look at blended learning and you look at them in cohesion with one another and as a combination, the depth that we can get into relative to student proficiency and student understanding and the experiences that we can provide for kids are too profound to ignore.
Wow, it's just such compelling information that you're sharing, truly. So just to go a little bit further in there, what are some examples of RTI and blended learning? And then share with us an example of what isn't RTI and blended learning.
So, Chris, I'll jump on this one real quick, and it's nice because Chris and I published a white paper together where we answer this question in a lot longer format than we'll answer right now. And you're welcome to go find the white paper. It's on Chris's website. It's on my website. It's on the ICLE website. But we talk about blended learning and RTI, and we talk really specifically about what it is and what it isn't, right? So a great combination of blended learning and RTI, what it is talking at kids less. What it is doing more and learning more, and doing so in such a way that differentiated and individualized and personalized instruction are all done to achieve mastery, right? And that is the path for us relative to RTI and blended learning, right? It's a deviation from the traditional path of teacher who is exerting all of the energy and cognitive effort in the classroom to now student exerting energy and cognitive effort, but in such a way that is purposeful and leads them towards mastery along a timeline that is best suited to where they are relative to their place in the proficiency spectrum, right? So what it's not is it is not jamming devices into pedagogies that haven't worked in the past, hoping that technology will fix it, because that is happening everywhere right now. Everyone is kind of looking at technology and looking at blended learning through this lens of, this might be the silver bullet. Well, it's not. Great teaching is always going to be the silver bullet. And inherent in great teaching is RTI, and inherent in great teaching is great blended teaching. And so what it's not is jamming devices into old pedagogies and hoping it will fix it. It is not isolating in the sense that, with RTI and blended learning, we can differentiate, individualize, and personalize, and now kids will be working kind of in isolation from one another and from the teacher. Like, no, it is a construct that increases touch points between kids and the teacher and between kids and one another, and increases the depth of those contact points between kids and the content.
So you said, I'm just going to reiterate some of these things and provide a few more examples of what we've done in our schools. But RTI is a got to do it. You got to do it. Every 50 state plus District of Columbia has regulations or laws at the state level that require schools to have plans related to RTI. It's you got to do it, and you should do it. I think a lot of educators recognize that. John Hattie has studied in his go to his website, continuously updated lists of effect sizes. He studied 138 discrete educational practices across thousands and thousands and thousands of different research studies. RTI is in the top 2 to 5, depending on when you look at it. It used to be 2. I just looked the other day. It's 5. It's still 1.07, Weston, but other things are higher. Okay. And as Weston said, blended learning, of course, is representative of principles and practices that have equally impressive effect sizes. So you got to do RTI. You should do it. But how do you do it? So think about it. How do you provide students more choice and voice? How do you provide a superior core instructional teaching and learning experience to kiddos? That's RTI, Tier 1. Well, how do you do it? You give students more ownership over pace and path and place and time. Blended pedagogies and practices can do that for you. Digitally enhanced pedagogies and practices can do that for you. You want to gather information on where kiddos are now and why they're there. Digitally enhanced diagnostics and analytics, they can help you do that. When you're using digital to organize yourselves and to help students organize themselves, Google Classroom, et cetera, that helps you serve students better within all tiers of support. And let's face it, there are some digitally first interventions out there and core programs that are digitally enhanced, digitally supplemented, but there are some really cool digital interventions out there that like Weston said, they're force multipliers for teachers. They don't take the place of teachers, but by golly, they sure help the teacher work with a small group over here in a really specific way. Wow, they have some deficits in multisyllabic phonics while the kiddos are receiving digitally enhanced, personalized pathways over there with their devices. So it's a wonderful thing. And it really is a match made in heaven in a sense. What isn't it? I'll keep it real simple. It's not one size fits all. Neither blended learning, nor RTI, nor the combination. And I think both blended learning and RTI have suffered from that unfortunate interpretation. I co-authored a book with my dear friend Tom Herc called RTI as a Verb. And one of the things that we meant is it's not a noun. It's going to depend upon where you are as a school, where your students are as learners. And so, boy, it's a bummer when it's BYOD, okay, or it's one-to-one. It need not be any of those things, and it can probably be all of those things. It's highly adaptive and responsive care and nurturing of kiddos so that they really inevitably all have an individualized learning plan and they all make significant progress so that they're future ready when they leave us.
I think where we need to focus is on Tier 1 and the conversations there. I think that's where we can have the biggest bang for our buck.
Absolutely, and so Tier 1, and I think blended learning is, I think, Weston, that it's often and appropriately thought of as being there. And in the long term, I have a dream, Laura. I have my own dreams to change the world, and one of my dreams is that we're not going to need Tier 2 and Tier 3 in the future. My concern is I would rather embrace the genius of and than the tyranny of or. So of course it's about Tier 1, but there are children right now who have significant deficits in foundational skills, and an improved Tier 1, quite frankly, isn't going to fix them. Not in time for them to be future ready. So they do need a superior core Tier 1, but they also need intervention yesterday. And I really do think blended, and by the way, there's some schools that are trying to figure out, where do I find the human potential for that? Where do I find the human resources for that? When do I find the time in my day for that? Where do I find the resources for that? And Weston knows that blended learning offers a promise to enhance what we can do in terms of our personnel, in terms of our time within the day, and in terms of our resources. There are opportunities there.
All right, the pairing of systems of support and blended learning could transform education, as we've been talking. How can we implement innovations that truly transform?
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm afraid I'm going to say what you're going to say. You go, Weston, because I have a backup in case you steal me.
So for me, it begins with pedagogy, right? So for me, it begins with pedagogy far more than it begins with device, which I know is a weird thing to hear from like a blended learning guy, right? But for me, it's about pedagogy. So we've rested on this notion in the past that great teaching is about, beginning with an anticipatory set and then labeling the learning and then providing guided practice and then assessing and then you close your lesson and then, like I am a great teacher because I've hit all of those points, right? And you know what? Tomorrow I'll come back into my classroom and I'll replicate that exact process, and some of my kids will reach proficiency by the end of the unit and many won't. And you know what? When some don't, we will blame the children for not listening, right? But that's like any great teacher out there, like there are so many teachers who are listening to this right now who know like that's not how great teaching works. It's just not. It is so much more non-linear than that. So it begins with pedagogy. So the question for us is, how do we take high effect size instructional strategies, how do we match those with rigorous standards, and how do we match that with digital tools that allow us to provide instruction to those
How do we
students?
blend them together, Weston?
Yeah, like how do we mash all those things together, right? How do we mash all those things together and apply those to different cohorts of kids within our own classroom depending on where they reside on the proficiency spectrum, right? So we have, by virtue of, I tweeted some of this out, by virtue of things like Google Forms and Kahoot and Poll Everywhere, like there are so many great tools out there that allow us to create formative assessments that give us in-the-moment data relative to where our kids stand on the proficiency spectrum. So that's not a cumbersome process for anymore. We can take those kids and immediately see where they are, and then we can match, again, high effect size instructional strategies, the standard, and the digital tool to help us cater directly to those students. Like that is the place where differentiation and individualization and personalization live, and that doesn't have to be this like massively cumbersome heavy lift for teachers. It's becoming easier and easier by the day as innovation becomes more widely available.
Has to be. One thing that Wes and I often, when we use this in our own work, in our writing, in our creation, in our supports for educators, is Simon Sinek's why, how, what. And so my advice would be, how can we implement innovations that truly transform? Respect the why, how, what. I liken why to culture. And in the PLC RTI world, we often talked about culture. Like, do teachers understand what we're asking? Do they see the need? Do they feel ready? Are they confident? Are we prepared to provide them the initial and ongoing supports that they need? So why is critically important, and the why doesn't just involve your teachers, your communities, and your students, your district offices, if you're doing this at a site. Why is this essential? Now, I hope we don't have to try too hard to make the case for digitally enhanced teaching and learning today, but nonetheless, you've got to start with the why. The how is ginormous. Not just those professional development pieces, but how about, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the broadband? Weston, how many schools do we go into that want to put more devices in their classroom, and we figure out that they don't even remotely have the broadband to support those in additional devices?
So
that ain't a good place
like
to
that,
be.
putting the cart before the horse. Yep.
So the how is the last thing you're doing. And by the way, the how is also the pedagogical shifts. Look, both Wes and I love direct instruction. The effect size is phenomenal, but in blended classrooms, it's not just direct instruction. It isn't at all. That's one pedagogical tool in your toolkit. And so Weston talked about that flexibility. Those what pieces come after. That's the last thing. What's what? The device, the digital curriculum. From a financial point of view, not just from a sustainability point of view, those should be the last things. You might not know which device that you want. You might not know the digital curriculum that you need, and it would be a bummer to buy those things and then have them sit on the shelf, either literally or figuratively, for a couple years while you figure out the why and the how.
Those are both great advice. So what are some first steps teachers can take in pairing instruction and intervention systems with blended learning? What would you suggest?
Try something. Try something. Try anything, right? So often teaching is such a funny thing because we push kids to learn and grow and step outside the comfort zone and step into the learning zone every single day. But I have to encourage teachers, like, move beyond the fear of not being excellent immediately. Right? We ask kids to do it every day. So when it comes to Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, when it comes to differentiation, individualization, and personalization, and melding technology and high effect size instructional strategies, like, don't feel like you have to get it perfect, exactly right, 100% of the time immediately. You know what? Go in there and give it a shot and be okay to fail, knowing that failure is not forever. Failure is feedback.
Yeah, and just to extend the cliches, perfection is the enemy of progress. Now, that's easier said than done. So you need trust. You need trust with your colleagues. You need to trust yourself, and you need leadership, principals. Let's be real, district office that's going to have that trust. I'm a simple guy. If you haven't gathered that, and so I'm going to keep it real simple, probably too simple. Digital can enhance the way you teach digital can enhance the way students access learning, and it can enhance the way they collaborate and produce. So, like Weston says, try something. Try one thing. Try to use digital practices in the way you teach new content. Try digital on another hand in the way that you have students access that new content, those new concepts, those new skills. Or thirdly, don't do all of these things, but thirdly, try something in the way that students collaborate with each other that is digitally enhanced, or the way that they show you what they know that's digitally enhanced. And there are simple tools that can do any one of those three things, and I would just try one thing in one of those three categories: how I teach it, how students access it, or how they collaborate and produce. You start there and then start getting fancier.
Yeah, go on the journey, get started, collaborate with teachers, and make a difference for kids. How can educators collaborate to sustain innovative practices, and what kind of leadership is essential to drive and support instruction and intervention systems in blended learning?
So, go ahead, Chris. I see you there. Go ahead. I've been jumping all over it. Let me sit back. Let me drink my coffee. You go.
Weston, I happen to be in Hawaii today, where it's 3 o'clock. I happen to know that it's 7 o'clock where you are. Am I right? Is it 7 o'clock p.m.? So I'm not sure why you're still drinking coffee, but
because I have 2 little kids, and 7 o'clock is late for me now.
You know what I was going to say, Weston? A drum that I beat a lot, and boy does it apply to blended practices and RTI. And that drum is, we got to stop trying to teach so darn much stuff. The worst way to prepare students for those new fancy tests that assess everything is to try to teach everything. If we teach less, students will learn more. But if you're going to embed time in your day to provide intervention and enrichment, tier 2, if you're going to embed time in your day for kiddos who have significant deficits in foundational skills to receive the life-saving support they need to catch up, you're going to have to cut some things out. If you're going to embed innovative pedagogies and practices to better engage students and to allow them to engage with new learning at a deeper level, you're going to have to cut some stuff out. And we got to give up the feeling that that's somehow shortchanging students' experiences. Oh no, it's going to make it better than ever. So my first thing is we got to give up that curse, man. We've known this since James Stigler wrote The Teaching Gap about the superiority of other countries in the first TIMSS studies in the 80s. We've known it was William Schmidt from Michigan State University, in analyzing those first wave of international results, that said, the problem with U.S. education is quite simple. Our curriculum is a mile wide and inch deep. It's a lie that we perpetuate to say, if I cover something new each day, somehow that's going to better prepare students for next year and for life. We got to give up that fallacy that teaching more stuff results in higher levels or greater levels of learning.
I agree with everything that Chris has said. I want to take my response to this question a slightly different direction. Just relative to sustainability and how we make this work. I think Laura and Liz, you guys have modeled for us one of the really, really great ways that we can do that, and that's to develop a professional learning network, right? And not just a network that exists in your own building, but God, there is so much expertise out there. The expertise that Chris and I can provide is, it is so minuscule relative to what is out there, right? And so develop that professional learning network and, share, steal, and seek out mentorship in any way that you can find it in RTI and in the blended space as you're getting out there and trying new things, because, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you dig into this space. Chances are there's somebody out there who is doing it now, or has at least tried it in the past, or has thought about it. And as you widen your professional learning network, that network is going to help you, kind of navigate this entire process. Chris is not going to do it because he's too humble to do so. You need to read just about every book Chris has written on RTI. right? So if you are specifically wondering, like, man, how do I do this RTI thing? One of the things that Chris does so profoundly well is his books take a fearfully complex topic for some people, and he makes it abundantly understandable, right? And I would say you'd find a lot of people out there you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of people out there who are just like super excited and passionate about RTI. But Chris is one of those people, and because he knows that A, it works, and B, it works for all kids. And so I would strongly suggest picking up Chris's books and just diving into those head first, because that is going to give you the direction and the background and the context that you need to be successful in this space. And then, you know, match that with blended practice in a way that's really purposeful.
Okay, so Chris and Weston, if you could share one thing that you would like lead-up teachers to walk away with or go out and do to make a difference, what would it be?
I'll take a shot, Weston, and I'm glad we're not doing this live and in person, because people might throw tomatoes at me, because my answer might surprise you, but then I'll try to explain. The one thing I would do is assess. And here's why I say that. I think the reason why great ideas don't get sustained, that they peter out, that somebody is allowed and succeeds in dismissing them or attacking them, is because we actually don't know whether or not they're working. So I know we assess too much. But man, if you're going to try something new, well, I don't care what it is, RTI or blended learning, or the perfect pairing of the two of them together, right? Or something super modest and first steppy in your classroom, please do that. But when you do it, pay attention to whether or not it's working. Be able to say, yep, this is working for kiddos, or no, it isn't, but I know it's a good idea, so I might need to just shift or adjust the way in which I'm doing it. What gets measured gets done, said Peter Drucker. And I found this other quote by Lord Kelvin, and if I remember from like 7th grade science, or maybe it was 8th grade science, he was like a temperature guy. Is that right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he says if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And so Chris Webber says if you can measure it, you can improve it. In fact, one of the other reasons we say that RTI is a verb is that we use it as a verb. We ask, to what extent are students responding to instruction? To what extent are they RTIing? To what extent are they responding to intervention? To what extent are they RTIing? I'm saying, like, if we can't collaboratively and accurately and frequently enough answer that question as professionals, not only can we not give feedback to kiddos and make adjustments as necessary, they need enrichment, they would benefit from intervention, but we're not going to be able to stand up when funding might get cut. Or somebody can come in and say, oh, why are you doing that? That's not working. Oh, yeah, it is working. Here's how we know. So my piece of advice, don't make it fancy schmancy. It doesn't have to be laborious, but gather evidence that you can use to say, yep, it's working, or it's working here and it's not working here, and here's what we're doing to make adjustments.
Instead of just evidence to report in the grade book, but evidence to support your teaching. I mean, that's just a mind shift that, reset for teachers, that, I'm going to go do this, but then I'm going to collect some data to report and talk about with my teachers to see what we think, if we should keep doing this. Yeah. That's subtle but huge.
I love Chris's message on assessment to inform instruction, and I'll admit on this end I was like, because I was going to talk about that, but I'll take it in a different direction because Chris has articulated it better than I would have been able to anyway. So good work there, Chris. The one thing I will say, and it's a word I'm not sure that we've brought up often enough, but if there's one thing I can kind of project out there and talk to teachers about, it's the relationship piece. Right? So we talk a lot about assessment to inform instruction. We talk a lot about pedagogy, and at the same time, inherent in all of those conversations and the foundational element of all those conversations are relationships. So as you're taking a look at ways to enhance RTI, as you are looking at ways to bring blended tools into your classroom, ask yourself, how does this blended tool, and how does this instructional strategy increase the connective tissue or enhance the connective tissue between myself and kids? How does this blended tool enhance the connective tissue between students and one another? How does this blended tool enhance the connective tissue between students and the content in a way that matters and in a way that makes it come alive for them? That would be my biggest piece of advice. Don't seek out ways to utilize technology in ways that create isolation. Seek out ways to utilize technology that enhance the bonds that exist between teacher and student, between student and student, and between student and content.
You got me
Beautiful.
thinking. I like connective tissue, and that makes me think of ecosystem. I like that.
Like it. I like it.
Excellent. Just excellent ways to go out with.
As we wrap up, would you guys please share what's coming up for you in the near future and how our listeners can connect with you?
We, Nathan Lang and I, are taking tomorrow off from Diverge Ed, but only 1 week, and we will be back every Tuesday thereafter for the rest of time. At Tuesdays, 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. It's a 1/2 hour awesome Twitter chat. We would love for you to join us. I know so many of you already do because there's awesome, wonderful crossover between the Lead Up community and Diverge Ed, but it's my favorite half hour of the week. So yeah, I'd love to have more people join us for Diverge Ed.
Super. And for me, you can find me on Twitter at Wes_Kieschnick, Kieschnick, or feel free to tune in and listen to my podcast. You can find it on iTunes or Google Play. It is called Teaching Keating. It is just a fun podcast that I do whereby I get to talk with people who I think are awesome, much like Chris, who's been a guest on Teaching Keating, and we highlight the performances of iconic movie and television teachers. We took a summer hiatus so that I could travel and be with my kids, but we are back next week with another new episode of Teaching Keating, so feel free to check that out, subscribe to it, and then be on the lookout for a publication in the works by myself and Chris coming hopefully soon.
I chose Professor Snape as my movie or television teacher for our podcast. It was awesome.
It was a good one. Chris chose a good one.
It is.
Hey, by the way,
an podcast.
and if you haven't read, this has nothing to do with anything, Liz. I'm so sorry, Laura, but
All good.
I'm a Harry Potter fan, obviously, and I read the play this summer, that came out. That's on stage in London, but the play got published, the manuscript or whatever. It's awesome, and Snape's in it. Anyway, you should read it if you love Harry Potter.
I have Harry Potter fans at home. So, Chris and Weston, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Lead Up Teach. I know our audience enjoyed hearing about your personal journey and all that you're doing to be a positive influence in education. And also, thank you to our amazing audience who tuned in tonight to Lead Up Teach.
We will share out tonight's Lead Up Teach episode on Twitter using the hashtag Lead Up Teach.
And we're also excited to announce the next date and time for our Lead Up Teach episode that will be taking place. It's episode 10, and it's going to be airing on Thursday, September 15th, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern Time. And we look forward to welcoming Justin Schleider on the topic of integrating tech to enhance collaboration and communication for learners and teachers.
Between now and our next Google Hangout, we encourage you to follow those you connected with tonight on Twitter or GHO and tweet using the Lead Up Teach hashtag on Twitter. We are signing off. Good night, all. Lead on and lead up. Bye, everyone.